na intimidation tumefanya hata kwa ile compound ya pili. Okay.
It has connected, so join with a different link. I'm on the meeting.
It was connected?
Yeah, I'm on the meeting.
Okay.
And tell Shamil to join.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sir.
When?
Mm.
Next year.
Which next year? What school is it?
School is starting 6.
Oh.
Huh?
6 or what?
Next month. University starts in 13 of next month. According to what I heard.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Basiman from Nigeria.
think you're still muted.
Are we all ready to start?
From my end, I think I'm ready.
Yes, we are ready to start.
I think I need to go. I know what to do.
I've got his other name.
You're welcome. You're welcome, everyone. Let me
Thank you.
just wait for a bit to get a go-ahead from the organizing committee. I trust you're well and keeping the social distance. So Amos, can I go ahead? And Renee?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you,
Just
sir.
proceed.
Thank you. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome, welcome, and welcome to the Wibena virtual conference on the impact of COVID-19 on the East Africa community. And we will be having a focus on knowledge is power. So knowledge is power. That is the theme of our conference today. It promises to be a very interesting and power-packed as well as really informative program. But before I go any further, allow me to apologize on behalf of the conference organizers as well as the executives from Wibena for the technical glitch that we experienced right before we joined this meeting. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again. My name is Shamil Tumisang Ahosi. I am the founding director at African Unity Club as well as the country director for PLO Foundation Botswana chapter. So I really do welcome you all to this conference. So what is it that we should be looking forward to today? We are going to be discussing on COVID-19. What is COVID-19? How has it impacted our lives? How has it impacted the economies of our different sorry. So as well as how we can, employ certain measures to mitigate the effects of COVID-19 on our economy. So the thing that, not the one thing, but one of the many things that we are going to be impact that COVID-19 had on the global economies, including our the continental economies, and then also we will also look at the different measures or different implementing strategies that our government have employed in order to mitigate the effects of COVID-19 on the economies, and then we will also be looking at the different relief measures that we have seen our government imploring in terms of, assisting or reliefs for households as well as for businesses. As we know, many SMEs have actually been adversely affected by COVID-19. As we know, most of our sectors and many of the participants here today, I believe that they are youth, and you know how our employment, the rates of unemployment have actually skyrocketed, and as well as so many young people who have previously, before COVID-19, had jobs. Now they have lost their jobs because different companies and different sectors are unable to make any money anymore. And we have seen how on international travel it has been cut down. We've seen the effect of COVID-19 on agricultural sector, on manufacturing, on hospitality, on the financial sector, but most importantly, we've also seen the development of the e-commerce sector, as well as digital economies that have by now, so many developers and innovators have now come to the environment to see how we can use digital economies as well as e-commerce to keep our economies running. So ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, I would like to introduce to you the Wibena impact, to the participants. And for that, allow me to introduce Mr. Just hold on for a minute. Hold on for a minute. Yes. So on the program here, it shows that we are now going to be introducing Wibena impact to the participants. We will be now knowing about the mission, the vision, and values of Wibena, as well as the interventions that Wibena have come up with in this area for the pandemic. So, ladies and gentlemen, with that, boom. Okay, with that, allow me to introduce to you Mr. Wycliffe. Allow me to introduce to you Mr. Wycliffe Aganda, who is the Executive Director at Wibena Institute. He is an experienced entrepreneur and ESL expert with a demonstrated or a proven track record on the education management industry, and he is a very skilled executive coach and a professional with a very strong education background. He is an executive coach, he is a career developer, as well as a leadership developer, and before he joined Wibena, he was the CEO and a registrar academic affairs at Premier CEDE Teachers College. So ladies and gentlemen, at this time, allow me to introduce to you Mr. Wycliffe Aganda. Mr. Wycliffe Aganda, we welcome you.
Thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes, you are very audible. You are very audible.
Yes. I am Rene Ifuayo. I'm the Regional Programs Manager for Wibena Impact. Well, the CEO will come in to sum up and close the conference, but Wibena Impact is an NGO, a non-governmental organization, a non-profit organization founded in 2018 with a mission to empower the most vulnerable children, women, and youth by enriching their lives through quality education, better environment, research and development, evaluation, and information sharing that enhances self-development to continually breed creativity and innovation. And our vision is to have a knowledgeable, healthy, and economically empowered society through enabling quality education and better standards of life for sustainable livelihood to the most vulnerable groups in Africa. We operate in Rwanda and Kenya for now, and we are looking for expansion to capture the entire continent of Africa. We believe that the prosperity and the well-being and the dignity and respect of African people will be brought about by its sons and daughters. So which is why we've taken this initiative as Wibena people to start uniting our continents, to start working on the most pressing issues on our continent, starting with us, with the youth and women and people of Africa, first of all. So our areas of intervention, we have 6 areas of intervention. We intervene in education and research and women and youth empowerment. And then we have WASH programs. These are hygiene and sanitation, environment and climate change, then leadership development skills. Leadership skills, development skills, this is why you're having this conference. It's part of that program, and we have people like Lumumba, the best of Pan-Africanists, to come and empower us. And we believe we have, as much as the health impacts of COVID has been assessed, we need to know the economic impact of COVID so that we know the burden that we young people will carry forward and how to resolve it and how to survive through it so that our continent can be prosperous and get us to where we want to be. So that is Wibena for now. And if you want to stay in touch, to engage us, if you have a program that you can work together, a project that you feel like we can help you with, or like we work mutually in a mutually beneficial way, please feel free to approach us. You have my email and there are my contacts. Please, let's stay in touch and let's build our continent for a greater and better future. Thank you so much.
Please, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much, sir. And ladies and gentlemen, let me remind you once again to please make sure that you do not interrupt or disrupt the meeting by virtue of unmuting yourselves when you are not speaking. So please, for the ease of flow of information to you, as well as for us to not waste time on the conference, please adhere to the rules that we are giving you to make sure that you are on mute, and please make sure that you do not have background noise. Very, very important for us. Very important for us. And then, ladies and gentlemen, let me remind you once again, we are here at the Wibena conference, and what we're here for is to look at the impact of COVID-19 on the East Africa community. And as I told you at the beginning, it promises to be a very informative session, and we are looking at information or knowledge is power. So among some of the speakers that we're going to be having, and power-packed as we know, we have Professor Lumumba, who I'd like to welcome, and then we also have Coach Archie Gustav, who is going to be, sharing with us, as well as, we are going to be having Sean Desire Tawinga, and he is also going to be sharing with us. And I'm saying that look forward to a really power-packed information seminar. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome or introduce to you Professor Lumumba. He's a professor of public law, most celebrated. He's a holder of an LLD on law. He is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya and Tanganyika. He is also a certified mediator. As we know, ladies and gentlemen, he was formerly the director of defunct Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission. We know the works that he has done on our continent, how well he is celebrated for that, as well as we know that he has been, he has been the founding trustee of the African Institute for Leaders and Leadership, the AILL, as well as the director of the PLO Lumumba Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, I can go on and on and on, but allow me at this point in time to welcome Professor Lumumba to give us a presentation. You're welcome, Professor, sir.
Thank you very much. I can see you are now becoming the darling of the continent, and we want to be exactly like that. Let me, first of all, also thank Wibena. Wibena is doing great work, and I look forward to the day that you will be present in every city and every village and in every hamlet in the continent of Africa. I know that in conversations such as this, the tendency is to make a presentation. I will not make a presentation. What I'll do is to highlight a number of issues which I consider to be critical at this stage in the life of East Africans and by extension Africans. We all know that courtesy of COVID, the continent is under lockdown. From the south to the north, from the east to the west, and in the center. We also know that the impact of that lockdown has been grave and monumental. The very obvious victims of the lockdown is the aviation industry. No planes are flying except cargo planes. So if you look at the back effect, ask yourselves what is happening with those who are supplying food to Ethiopian Airlines, to South African Airlines, to Kenya Airways, to Air Peace in Nigeria, to Air Botswana, Air Namibia, Zambia, Malawi. All those people whom we know now have no jobs. That is the obvious impact of COVID-19. You go into the sector of tourism and you pick any one country, pick South Africa, which receives anything between 6 and 10 million tourists every year. That is gone. Go to Namibia, those who go to visit the sand dunes in the Walfish Bay. Go to Botswana, those who go to Chobe. Go to Zimbabwe and Zambia, those who visit the Mosi Otunya Falls. Go to Malawi, those who visit Lake Malawi and eat chambo there. Go to Mozambique and go to West Africa, those who visit the Elmina Castle and the Cape Coast Castle in Ghana. Go to Ethiopia, those who visit Lalibela. Come to Kenya, those who look at the migration of the wildebeest. And many others. A multi-billion-dollar industry is on its knees. And the impact is grave. And the impact is fundamental. And the impact is deep. And the impact is worrying, and we are worried because even as I speak, there are countries in East Africa, which is our focus of conversation, which are still under lockdown. Uganda is still under lockdown. Kenya is still under something between a lockdown and a curfew. The Tanzanians, whom we are now beginning to think may possibly have been wiser than all of us, are going on about their business, but even they are handicapped because you cannot trade with yourself completely. Burundi also is in the same position as Tanzania. Rwanda has opened up. South Sudan. And even if you wanted to extend the East African region and went to Ethiopia and Eritrea and Somalia. So the impact is grave. But beyond the lamentation, the question that we are asking, what are the lessons that we have drawn from this particular situation that can help us look to the future? The old saying is that necessity is the mother of creation. And I think that there is a sense in which the necessity of the moment has enabled us to begin to think a little differently. We are beginning to think a little differently in critical areas. Number one, how do we feed ourselves without relying on others? And within the East African region, we now have to ask ourselves, what is it that Tanzania can supply that can benefit the entire region? What is it that Uganda can supply that can satisfy the entire region? What is it that Rwanda can and Burundi can and South Sudan can? And if you go outside, what is it that Ethiopia can? So we are beginning to think like that, so that we are no longer thinking about importing sugar from Brazil and maize from Mexico. And that requires that our universities of agriculture, the Edward Moronge Sokoine University in Tanzania, should now be thinking about how it will impact agriculture in the region. Outside of that, we ought to ask ourselves, how is it that we harmonize our laws? What we have witnessed, for example, in the recent past, where lorries supplying goods are held up, if not on the Rwandese border, it is on the Ugandan border. If it is not on the Ugandan border, it is on the Tanzanian border, or the Kenyan border, or the Burundian border, or the South Sudanese border. There is need for harmonization. And that is why many of us, some of us, including myself, always insist that we must have a Pan-Africanist approach. The argument that I'm using here in this conversation apply with equal effect to Southern Africa. They apply with equal effect to Central Africa. They apply with equal effect to Western Africa, and they apply with equal effect to Northern Africa. The more harmonized we are, the more we collaborate, the better we are able to confront our existential problems for the benefit of our people. Because ultimately we must ask ourselves many things. Why do we have governments? Why do we do all these things? And I will do something that I never do, but I'll do it nevertheless, because I've always found some great depth and thought in the American Declaration of Independence, the opening words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that it is for this reason that governments are instituted amongst men, that they may, these are not the words of the declaration, they are my own words, that they may midwife the delivery of this. So when we are talking about the effect of COVID-19, and we are looking at our governments, is because we have deliberately chosen to put a few men and women into positions of responsibility to ensure that they are the midwives of the things that we want to do. And we pay taxes to that administration in order for these things to be done. The question is, what lessons have we learned? We have discovered that many of our governments don't even invest properly in the health sector. We have discovered that many of our governments don't even invest properly in the education sector. We have discovered that many of our governments don't even invest as they should in the agricultural sector. We have discovered that we have a soft underbelly. And what are the lessons then that we have learned from this entire situation and this debacle? That going forward, we must always be prepared, we must always be ready. One of the things that pains me most is that when an African leader, and I'm using the word leader very loosely, because many of them are not leaders, but I'm using it loosely. Whenever they fall sick, they never seek medical attention in their own countries. They go out and seek medical attention in countries run by others. Can we afford that? Does it even make sense? And yet that is what happens in many African countries. Where is the knowledge that we are talking about? How are we going to behave? And this perhaps is the last point I want to make. Now that we have COVID and we know and have appreciated its impact, I hear people use words such as post-COVID, we are going to behave in this way. There is no post-COVID. COVID is always going to be with us. Is malaria not? Is HIV/AIDS not with us? Is influenza not with us? Diseases come and they remain. The only thing that happens is that we discover medicine or vaccines, or that we become resistant to them. So as we go into that era where we are now saying that we can no longer remain in permanent lockdown, and that going forward we must learn to live with COVID and engage in all the things that we ought to engage in, the question that we must ask, what must we do? As East Africans and as Africans, we must begin to do things for ourselves. We must learn to make our own medicine. We must learn to make our own medical equipment. We must learn to have our own masks, our own protective gear. We must learn to make our own ventilators. We must have our own vaccines. We must have our own medicine. That is in the medical arena. In the arena of education, we must learn to have our own curriculum. Our curriculum whose only agenda is to open our minds and to make us do that which is good and right for our benefit. We must do that in the arena of education. In the arena of agriculture, we must ensure that we have the capacity and the ability to feed ourselves. And number 4, we must also be innovators. We must use our young men and women to good effect. And I think that if we do that and we collaborate continentally, this idea that little Burundi is doing things herself, or that little Eswatini is doing things herself, that little Lesotho is doing things herself, that Sao Tome and Principe, Seychelles, Guinea-Bissau, Cabo Verde is completely misguided. The only way in which we can achieve what we desire is through continental collaboration. And I have no doubt now that there is apparent appetite across the continent to do the right thing and to do it for the long haul. It will be well with us. And you young men and women who are now here, you are not leaders of tomorrow. You are co-generational leaders, and you must play your part, and it will be well with us. God bless you.
Prof. Absolutely and absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Wibena virtual conference on the impacts of COVID-19 on East Africa community. And right now we've just heard from Professor Lumumba. He actually called us to account as young people, as different stakeholders at our national, at a continental level. He basically called for a continental integration, not a sovereign position that we've been actually seeing many of our member states taking. In fact, he is just literally putting on the responsibility on us, particularly the young people, to utilize our creativity and our innovation in order for us to make sure that we come up with solutions that will see Africa to its success story. One of the topics that I know that Prof is very, he likes so much is the issue of Africans in the diaspora. And talking about that, Prof, you gave us you gave us lessons that we need to draw from COVID-19. You also, asked us a very critical question of how are we as Africans going to continue to feed ourselves? how are we going to continue to make sure that our economies are functional? You also talked to universities utilizing our research institutes to make sure that we come up with the decisions and solutions that can see Africa to the one that we want. You came on and you also talked about harmonization of laws. As we know, it's one of the biggest issues in, everywhere else, whether EAC or even here in SADC. We know that our laws are quite defragmented, and you called us to make sure that we harmonize our laws in order for us to integrate as a continent. You talked about, you gave a specific, a case study of the American Declaration of Freedom. What does it mean? But most importantly, what are the lessons that we need to actually take away as Africans? And coming back to you, ladies and gentlemen, remember that at this point in time, we would like for you to keep on asking those questions and comments on the comment section. We'll be looking out for those questions and we'll be directing them to our speakers. So, Prof, I would like to ask you this question. How do you see Africans in the diaspora, coming aboard to, in fact, tackle this impact or the effects of COVID-19 on us? Like you rightly said, there's no COVID-19 because there's no post-COVID-19 because COVID-19 is here to stay, just as HIV came and is here to stay. And what is it that you see the Africans in the diaspora, contributing towards Africa's development in this pandemic?
Thank you very much. First of all, I must say that the single thing that COVID-19 has done is to re-energize our enthusiasm for things African. And this is true both within the continent and outside of the continent. I know as a fact, and I'm involved very intimately with an initiative that has been put together by a number of people under the leadership of Dr. Arikana Chihombori Kwao, which is the Africa Diaspora Institute, which will be launched on the 17th day of July. And the idea of that institute is to put together Africans in the diaspora, to make them and to get them involved in what is happening in the continent of Africa at a very practical level. I'm also involved with an African American who is currently resident in Atlanta, Georgia, Rosenthal, who is in the process of putting together a few people to create a Pan-African bank for the purpose of ensuring that SMEs, particularly young men and women women specifically among others, are enabled so that we can cushion ourselves against the vagaries only of COVID-19, but other things, other diseases, and other things that undermine our capacity to realize happiness in this temporal world. So the diaspora to me is critical. Only yesterday I had a very long discussion with a number of African Americans, some of whom are based outside, some in the Caribbean, some in Latin America. And what is happening now is Africans, wherever they are, whether they are in Brazil or in Barbados or in Jamaica or in Europe, we are now beginning to speak the same language. And I think that that is very useful. And perhaps the value that we have, particularly for the younger people, for somebody like me who believes in co-generational leadership, is to ensure that we work together and we use these efforts that we are making to enable and to energize whatever effort that you want to engage in for the long-term benefit. One of the things that we want to do immediately the world opens up is to begin to engage heads of state, to begin to engage the more progressive presidents and the more progressive prime ministers initially, so that these individuals who are in charge of governments begin to see a different world. And there are quite a number of progressive African leaders whose names I shall not mention here, but we are already engaging them, and quite a number of them are very positive and are saying, we are prepared to work with you going forward to ensure that we achieve our mandate.
Thank you a lot for your presentation, Professor Lumumba. I'm Rene Yves Uwayo, the Regional Programs Manager for Wibena Impact. We are having some intervention.
Yes, Renee?
Yes, we are having some interventions from the participants. We are having Yemima from Tanzania. She's asking,
Yes.
talking about having everything of our own. Do you think we can succeed because some of our presidents tried to do this, but then Western people, they interfered, in the end they failed. Do you think our generation, do you think this time we can be able to do things on our own? That was her question.
No, we will definitely succeed. And I'm very happy that she's speaking from Tanzania. President John Joseph Pombo Magufuli, in the midst of all these, was very clear that nobody is going to dictate to Tanzania what to do. Tanzania has our doctors, Tanzania has our leaders. We recognize that there is the COVID-19 virus, but we are going to do things in a scientifically Tanzanian way. Now, because President John Joseph Magufuli was bold, people are beginning to ask, perhaps he was right, because it looks like he was right, but we are reluctant to admit it. So if we have that kind of Magufuli approach, then it's going to be useful. And now that you are talking about the president of Ghana, Nana Dankwa Addo Akufo-Addo, has also been very clear in the approach that he has taken. Prime Minister Abiy of Ethiopia, and whether you agree with them or not, even President Paul Kagame in Rwanda, or President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni of Uganda, there has been clarity in the continent of Africa. And to me, that suggests to me that we are capable of doing things without reference to anybody, but learning from others. If you go even to countries such as Eswatini, or even in Lesotho, little countries such as Lesotho or Botswana or Namibia, I can't mention all of them. There is a sense in which there has been what one may describe as country-specific approaches, because science does not know countries. Science, by its very nature, is universal. So once we accept that there is COVID-19 and nobody knows how to deal with it, so we wash our hands, which is good for hygiene. We sanitize, which is good for hygiene. Not that it's a cure, but it's good for hygiene. So I can't agree more. It is your generation that must think very differently. And I want to conclude my answer by making reference to a book that I commend to everybody, every young African, written in 1933 by Carter G. Woodson, a great African-American, The Miseducation of the Negro. He says, anybody who controls your mind controls you. Because once he controls your mind and has made you believe that you are inferior and you are only fit to use the back door, you will always use the back door. And if there is no back door, you'll create one for yourself. So one of the things that we should do is to liberate our minds. And those of you who are present in this forum are some of the young men and women who are already liberated. You are already liberated. Your duty now is to ensure that you infect the others who are still laboring under low self-esteem.
Thank you so much for your response, Professor. It was a very complete and effective response. We have another question from Bernard. He's saying, Professor, do you see the agriculture sector development as a hedge to future pandemics? Which sector of the African economy can you recommend as a shield to any pandemic? You would agree that we need to build Africa through the growth of a robust economic sector. So which sector would you recommend? That was his question.
You know, I was just reading something from the current director of the head of the African Development Bank, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina. And Akinwumi Adesina, whom I respect a great deal and who was a former minister for agriculture in Nigeria, said, no civilization has ever grown without developing agriculture. If you can't feed yourself, don't cheat yourself, you are going nowhere. So my own view is that we as Africans must be able to feed ourselves. It is from agro-industry that we go into other industries. That is when we go into nanotechnology and others. So I have no doubt in my mind that the area to focus on is agriculture. And let me give you an example how Africa can be great. During my own lifetime in Malawi, during the presidency of the first term of President Mbingu wa Mutharika, not Patrick wa Mutharika, his brother who has just been voted out of office, Mbingu wa Mutharika, he said, I'm going to ensure that Malawi is food sufficient. And within 5 years it was. The other example is Isidore Noel Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso. Between 1983 and 1987, he had made Burkina Faso food sufficient. If you cannot feed yourself, there is nowhere you are going. So agriculture is the foundation. And once you have agriculture well knit, and you are fed, and you are happy, then you can begin to think. I want to ask you, all of you, a very personal question. Have you ever been hungry? When you are hungry, you only think about the next meal. You don't think about nanotechnology. So the idea is to feed ourselves so that we can begin to think.
Thank you a lot.
Absolutely, absolutely. And with that, Prof, thank you so much for those interventions and the questions that you have asked. There is so much more that we really want to ask you, but I would like for us to, to just say this while when we are now going on flowing to the next item on our program. And you have mentioned social protection mechanisms that need to make sure that they safeguard incomes and they extend to to unemployment benefits for the youth. And you've also touched on so much, particularly, and gave us that the book that we need to focus on, or rather that you recommended everyone to read, by Carter Woodson, that is The Miseducation of the Negro. You asked us a very personal question of, have we been ever hungry? We have been hungry, Prof. We are hungry now. And we are going to take your encouraging words, and we are going to develop solutions for Africa. We are going to develop solutions that will feed our own in our countries. So, Prof, without any further ado, allow me to welcome you once again to give us the speech.
Thank you very much. I'll say no more. My last words to you as you continue with the conversation is, the future of Africa is our young men and women. It is upon your shoulders that we are going to grow everything, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's the fourth industrial revolution, whether it is innovation, whether it is in any sector. It is the young people who must be innovators. And I am saying that beyond what you are doing now, and particularly to Wibena, we must collaborate. We must begin to do things on the ground, even on a small scale. We must begin to engage in agriculture. We must begin to engage in innovation and invention. And once we do that, some of us are available here, not because we have the monopoly of knowledge and wisdom, but wisdom says that a fool learns from his own mistakes. A wise person learns from the mistakes of others. So don't make mistakes, learn from the mistakes so that you can be wise. And we are going to help you in order to ensure that you avoid the landmine you may have stepped on when we were growing up. So go out there in the knowledge that you have people looking after you.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you so much. But before you go, we would like for, before I close you up, I would like for you to take the last 3 questions. And if my colleague
Okay.
has the last 3 questions, if my colleague has the last 3 questions, I would like for him to direct them to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. We are having many people willing to interact with you, and it's so much unfortunate that we have you for this short time, but hopefully you keep interacting with us. There's this young man from Tanzania. He's called John Naman. He said, Professor, you have made one of the presentations in Dar es Salaam on Mogulfication of Africa. Do you have any plan to make a presentation on the perception and decision of our President Magufuli on COVID-20 and listens to other African countries?
Yes, let me have all the 3 questions so that we are more.
Thank you so much. Let me go find another one. Another one is called Anastase Ndagijimana from Rwanda. He's saying, Professor Lumumba, in Africa you have everything as resources. Why our young people still have that intention of going to Europe and other continents? And in response to this COVID-19, it's said by the Western countries and other people, not from Africa, that COVID-19 will kill Africans in big number. What do you think as reasons why they say this? This is the second question. Let me find.
We can take that.
Yes, there's another young man who had asked a very good question from Lesotho.
Yes.
Someone, I'm not sure if I will pronounce this right. He's called Male Achloa, speaking from Lesotho. He said, Professor, how do you reduce the dependency syndrome from the Westerns so that we can start having our own things and start being innovative? So far, those are the 3.
Let me answer those. First of all, let me start with my good friend from Lesotho. The dependency syndrome will only reduce when Africans begin to as one unit. And that is why the Africa Continental Free Trade Area has been put in place, and my very good friend from South Africa, Wamkele Mene, has now been made the Secretary General. It will begin to operate in the month of January, the year 2021. Because we are in a continent, as I speak to you now, my own country, Kenya, in the last 1 month has imported maize from Mexico. Why should Kenya import maize from Mexico while we have maize in Malawi or in Zambia or in Tanzania? So that our income goes to the Mexicans. The SCTFA is designed to ensure that before African money leaves the continent, it will have gone round within Africa 100 times. And we must therefore support the SCTFA to ensure that we use our money within the continent. The question that my good friend from Rwanda has asked is, how is it that we have this idea of young people wanting to go outside of the continent? The reason is that in many countries in Africa, the conditions are not right. Look at the situation as it has been for a long time in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Even if you wanted to stay, you won't stay because the environment has been poisoned by the political class. Look at the situation in southern Cameroon, or the situation in Mali, or in Mauritania, or in Central African Republic, or in Eritrea, or in Somalia. And that is why this year, the African Union said, we must silence the guns. As long as we don't silence the gun, the environment will not be an environment where people want to stay. I remember at one time I was at a conference in Austria in Europe, and I said that people should go back home. And a young doctor from Zimbabwe told me, I hear you and I understand you, but I want to go home, but I want to tell you the last time I was in Zimbabwe, my salary was equivalent to $5 a month. Should I go back home? I told her, don't go back home. In other words, you've got to ensure that you have an environment which is conducive, because people also have personal needs. And even when you ask people to sacrifice, it must be sacrifice within reason. The last question is about Magulification. My friend John Joseph Pombe Magufuli is now beginning to emerge, even in the minds and hearts of those who did not like what he was doing, as somebody who has daring. My Tanzanian friend will understand me when I say Rais John Joseph Pombe Magufuli ana maono na uthubutu. He has vision and daring, and that is what you need in a leader as long as you have the people behind you. And I think that one of the things that President John Joseph Pombe Magufuli must do now is to accept an interview where he talks to fellow African leaders that in matters such as these, you've got to have an approach that is sensitive to your immediate environment. You don't lock down simply because Italy has locked down. You don't lock down simply because Spain has locked down. You don't lock down simply because the United States of America has locked down. You lock down because the science that you are looking at says it is good to lock down, and the circumstances also support the locking down. And I think President John Joseph Magufuli owes the world that particular interview in which he will be vindicated as having been visionary and bold. That is not to say that COVID does not exist in Tanzania. It does, but how you approach it is what matters going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. You touched on the Continental Free Trade Agreement, which presents a very huge opportunity for SMMEs and manufacturers, as well as producers and traders in Africa to trade and have access to the continental market. And you also gave, a concept, Magufulification. And
Yeah.
on top of that, you also still implored us to make sure that, we as Africans, we continue doing things for ourselves. It's very important for us to be self-sufficient. And for that, Prof, we thank you so much for your pragmatism. We thank you so much for, for so much that you're doing, for teaching us as young people. And Prof, before I know that there is so much questions that we have for you.
I can hear you, but I want to allow the conversation to go on and to be enriched by other younger minds.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Prof. And ladies and gentlemen, let me remind you once again that we are here gathered by Wibena, which is a non-governmental organization, and we are here to discuss the impact of COVID-19 on the East African community. And we just heard from Professor Lumumba, a very pragmatic leader that we all cherish. And for now, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to move on to the next item on our program. But before we do that, allow me to remind you once again that please make sure that you keep those questions coming, keep those comments coming here on our platforms. Even I'm very aware that we are also live on our Facebook pages. Make sure that you share this information with as many people as possible. And so, ladies and gentlemen, allow me now to move on to the intervention from Mr. John Desire Ntawiniga. I hope I said it right. I know I said it right. So we welcome you, John. Mr. Ntawiniga. Okay, while we're still waiting for him, ladies and gentlemen, remember that due to COVID-19, there has been a suspension of international travel that affects directly our hospitality industries as well as the aviation sector that we had Prof speaking so eloquently on and touching on the basic, lives that have actually been touched by that. These are our own mothers, brothers, and sisters who are working in the hospitality sectors, and we know that our churches have also been closed, and the informal sector have also been hugely affected. These are our brothers and sisters who are selling biscuits in the street, who are selling us clothing on the street for an income. As we know, they have been hugely affected, and we are here to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on the East African community, on the economy, as well as what it is that we can do and are capable of doing and are willing to do as Africans to make sure that the impact of COVID-19 are as gross as we already anticipate. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Juan, are you available now? Mr. Desire, are you available? Can someone on the tech team make sure that we have him? But let me remind you once again, yes?
Let's go to Dr. Achu Gustav. Is in.
Thank you so much. So due to that, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce to you once again Dr. Coach Achu Gustav. And ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Coach Achu Gustav is hold on, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, he is an advanced education coach. He is also in the international education and development sector, as well as, ladies and gentlemen, we know that he has been at BTH Education Group, and BTH is an international where he basically put the skills acquired when he obtained the professional early education PECE program certificate. Ladies and gentlemen, you might also know that he is also worked. He is a corporate cyber strategist at Cyber for Africa, a project as a SOCA cyber security division. There is so much that I can say about Dr. Coach Achu Gustav, ladies and gentlemen, but without any further ado, allow me to welcome him.
Okay, so I'm happy to be here today and to join everybody else on this important topic. And this time, I'm very appreciative of the professor Lumumba, who just gave us a very important point about what we should be focused on as Africans in such a trying time as this. So if we look at the impact of COVID-19 recession on the advanced economies, according to the World Bank, we realize that the economic activity among advanced economies is anticipated to shrink to about 7% in 2020, as domestic demand and supply, trade and finance have been severely disrupted. And e.g., if you look at the U.S. economy is forecasted to contract by 6.1% this year, reflecting the disruptions associated with the pandemic control measures. The Euro area output is expected to shrink by 9.1% in 2020, as widespread outbreak took a heavy toll on the activity. Japan's economy is anticipated to shrink by 6.1%, as preventative measures have slowed economic activity. And if you move away from that into the recession on emerging markets and developing economies like Africa, East Africa included, while the magnitude of disruption varies from region to region, emerging markets and developing economies have vulnerabilities that are magnified by external shocks, such as hefty reliance on global trade, tourism, commodity exports and external financing. So if we were to focus on a bit of a case study on East Africa, from East African Trade and Investment Report 2018, the main export from East Africa in this 2018 included minerals like ore, gold, and diamond, tea, you got coffee, cocoa, and horticulture products. The total EAC imports grew by 19.2% to about USD 38.3 billion in 2018 from USD 32.2 billion in 2017. The lion's share of the imports came from Asia and the Middle East, from countries like China. You have India and UAE trading partners. According to the ITC trade map, the EAC imports from China increased by 6%. From USD 6.9 million in 2017 to USD 7.3 billion in 2018, USD 6.9 billion in 2017 to USD 7.3 billion in 2018. On the other hand, the EAC exports to China increased by 22% from USD 1.5 billion in 2017 to USD 1.9 billion in 2018. So if you're looking at that, one can understand the impact of COVID-19 and what this impact can play. One cannot underestimate that impact when you're looking at major trading partners to the EAC like China. So what's my take home? My take home is this. The world economy during the 19th century was focused on Britain, early start in the Industrial Revolution, with the English pound becoming the world's major currency and the gold standard. However, towards the end of the 19th century, Britain did not respond to new technological and managerial realities. Their dominance began to diminish. So when we're looking at means of production, with respect to Africa and East Africa, and amidst this pandemic, when you're looking at the means of production in terms of agrarian economy, industrial economies, and the knowledge economies, you look at you find a disparity there. You find the answers to questions about readiness. For example, the agrarian economy was based on traditional production, maintenance of crops and possession of farmlands. You have the industrial economy that is after the Industrial Revolution of 1760 to 1840 that witnessed a transition that was enabled by the use of technology for mass production that included going from hand production methods to machines, new chemical manufacturing, iron production processes, increasing use of steam power, water power, the development of machine tools, the rise of mechanized factory systems, and the knowledge economy, which is the current present economy, which is focused on the use of knowledge for the creation of goods and services. In particular, the knowledge economy refers to a high portion of skilled workers in the economy of regions, of countries of the world, and the idea that most jobs require specialized skills. The main personal capital of this economy, of the knowledge economy, is of knowledge workers in this economy is knowledge. And to that effect, it is non-subjective. Knowledge is the non-subjective kernel of this era, of the information era, of the knowledge era, of the digital era. And so if in conclusion to that issue, if I'm going to follow up with a couple of paragraphs in conclusion to that issue, the global economy is egregiously affected because of the existential incongruity or discrepancies in the means of production of economic value. As a world, there are grave supranational discrepancies before the COVID-19 recession. There are grave discrepancies before this recession. World growth has been plummeting over the last decade. As a matter of fact, according to World Bank and the UN, since 1970, global growth rate has remained under 4.5%. Furthermore, government policy, especially across emerging markets and developing economies, is heavily dependent on what you call command economic systems, than a mixed economic system that includes the market economy. So if you're regarding hiring of human capital, most supranational policies favor outdated degree-based systems over skill-based systems as the main human capital of the current knowledge economy. This has disfavored the growth for emerging markets and developing economies. So lastly, until we garner resources to unify and consolidate knowledge capital via more advanced borderless markets, via boundless technologies, and utile occupational learning, global growth is going to keep plummeting after the COVID-19 pandemic. E.g., e-commerce as a major means of production, the use of when we talk about the use of knowledge to create services in knowledge economies, what comes to mind is e-commerce. So e-commerce is still incipiently practiced across many nations and infinitesimally present in African countries. How then shall we grow as a world? Looking at the SDG 17, Global Partnership for Development, or how then shall we grow as a continent when we are looking at the African Development Goals for 2063? How then shall we grow? So these are the issues, these are the thematics, these are the themes that come to mind, and this is the kind of line that we can begin to apply food for thought. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Gustav. And there you mentioned commodity exports. You also mentioned, the supranational disparities, as well as you introduced us to the concept of command economy system. And there is a report that was just recently launched by Deloitte, and it analyzed some of the impact of East African of COVID on East African community. And they, in that report, they also mentioned that, Africa's projected GDP growth of 3.2% for 2020 is now expected to fall at minus 0.8%. And they said that this is due to the enforced partial and total lockdown of several economies, that was brought by the pandemic. They also mentioned, that the outbreak has led to the disruption in the various sectors, and notably on the financial industry. So, Doctor, we know that when you spoke about e-commerce, and the majority of the success of e-commerce platforms is reliant on the financial sector. How we will be able to move finance from East Africa all the way to Southern Africa, how we as Africans are going to continue trading with one another, and how do you see young people playing a huge role in in innovations, especially to curb this financial sector problems that we are currently facing. And on that, I will also, while you are answering on that question, I would like to also ask my colleague to prepare some of the questions that our colleagues are answering on our social media platforms, as well as here on Zoom. So, Dr. Gustav, on the financial sector, the role of youth, please.
So I didn't get the question. Was there a question?
Yes. Okay, so I was saying that e-commerce cannot be successful without payment gateways, proper payment gateways. And as we know, that is something that as Africans, we have very little, it has proved, we've proved to have very little confidence on, e-monies and all that. And I know that the East Africa community has done much on, the mobile payments and all, but the rest of Africa is still lagging behind. How do you see the role of youth playing that to make sure that we continue trading to up our economies in this pandemic?
Thank you. Very great question. Whoever asked a question, be it you, it's an amazing question regarding e-commerce. And let's look at it this way, straight to the point. First of all, we want to talk about Pan-Africa. We want to talk about Africa as a continent. We want to focus on building this continent together. But the unity of Africa is the unity of the rest of the world. And so you can talk about African unity and excommunicate the rest of the world in that unity. When it comes to economic development, when it comes to the digital era, we cannot excommunicate the rest of the world. So sometimes this is there's a little bit of ambiguity when it comes to looking at the unification of Africa. The unification of Africa is not the excommunication of the rest of the world in terms of the digital economy. Because when you say you want to excommunicate the rest of the world, what exactly do you mean? Are you saying that you're going to be excommunicated from the World Wide Web? Are you saying you're going to be excommunicated from cloud, from the internet as a whole? What are you going to be excommunicated from? So yeah, we have issues. We have continental issues in terms of financing, and that has a lot of ad hoc impact on e-commerce. But we have to corroborate that with the resources, the facilities that the rest of the world is using. E.g., in Africa, to deal with that issue on e-commerce, there are banking structures. There are banking structures provided as services by companies where Africans can have accounts in places in economies like the U.S. The U.S. is a strong economy focused on knowledge, and so e.g., you have the Silicon Bank. One of the banks that is open to such an investment is the Silicon Bank. Africans can ad hoc to banks that are provided by intermediary companies in the U.S. and practice e-commerce. And e-commerce, I'm so glad you mentioned that. It's an amazing thing. It's not a question of whether we are ready. We're going to never be ready until we're ready. You move yourself to readiness. And part of the reason why we as Africans are not on the e-commerce platform cannot be tied to finances alone. It could be tied to the inaptitudes that we have. It could be tied to negligences. It could be tied to the economic system that we have associated with that, because fundamentally the kind of economic, it can be tied to the educational system that we have, because the educational system fundamentally that we have is what should promulgate or this type of disenfranchisement from systems that don't work. So of course, I identify in that question that there are financial issues with respect to our brick and mortar financial actually teachers institutions that do not want to create financial policies, but there are go-arounds to this. There are go-arounds, if I could say that. There are go-arounds, there are turning points that we could use to flank brick and mortar trali teachers institutions in Africa that do not want us to move into what the digital era has to offer, what e-commerce has to offer in the digital era. And so if you're going to be practicing drop shipping in e-commerce, if you're going to be moving with stores, if you're going to be focused on back-end structures or security measures or networking or whatever, everything in the digital era can be monetized. And we could connect to financial structures through third-party services and institutions and companies in other countries that are willing and open to help Africa to promulgate benefits and successes in the digital economy. So I think that that is a bit of what we should be looking at in the continent.
Thank you so much for your intervention and your insights and inputs, Dr. Coach Gustav. That was so brilliant, and I'm pretty sure it helped young people. Me, myself, it really helped me. Let's look at the questions from the chat box from participants. We have Grass Ijiraneza. He asked, Dr. Coach, what do you think each organization, or any business, can do to survive this coronavirus pandemic? What can businesses do to survive this pandemic? And we have another question from Pritchard Chambari. He said, the knowledge economy is human capital, as in it's human capital driven. It is unfortunate that Africa is bleeding human capital at a large scale. What can be done to curb this brain drain? And another one, someone is saying, let me get to the name, sorry. She's called Sharon Gaita. She's saying, I have a question. Africa has less confidence in their leaders, especially in terms of corruption and embezzlement of funds. There is lack of reliable check and balance mechanisms, especially in the finance sector. How will unification of Africa eradicate or lower these vices? And the last one from Evans Nyabayo, he's saying, Doctor, there is a lot of disparity in African countries. What do you think can normalize the growth of all countries and create more jobs for youths? Thank you. Those are the 4 questions we have for now. If you can answer them, would be very much appreciative.
Thank you so much. I'm going to move as I'm going to try to be as succinct as possible. So the first question is about how can businesses take advantage of e-commerce or take advantage of digital marketing or the resources that the digital era has to provide. So you see, if businesses want to take advantage, the first thing is that we're already on the down low. We're already on an ankle level strategy here, because we are reactionary, and we waited for the pandemic. A lot of countries waited for the pandemic to be an eye-opener as to whether their educational systems, their corporate development structures, the strategies, the structures they were using to do business, the formulaic processes in the policy making for businesses was right or wrong. A lot of people were practicing brick and mortar methods of doing businesses. We trusted it. For example, a question here: are our markets, our food markets, our grocery businesses, are they online? No. Could you order from a shelf? Could you go onto a shelf? Is that something that is official in African markets? Do we predominantly have our stores online or offline? Are we waiting for COVID-19 to tell us that? No. You see, let's look at eBay. Look at eBay. Look at AliExpress. AliExpress and this other company. And there is or you look at Kevin Zhang, or I think that is his name, who made over 20 million US$ last year on e-commerce. He made 20 million e-commerce, doing drop shipping on e-commerce. Stores were online using backends like AliExpress, maybe eBay, and all of that. Now, if you're practicing a brick and mortar method of doing business, a 1922 business operating in the 21st century, how do you think you're going to succeed? Your outputs are completely different. Your strategies are broken. They are Indo-civilized strategies. And so it is not about COVID-19. It's about living in the digital era and be conversant with the era and align yourself with the era. Businesses in Africa are Indo-civilized businesses. They're living in 1920 or agrarian culture. They're using pre-existing structures that were before the Industrial Revolution. And so if we want to move and compete with the Western world, if we want to survive or other disruptions in the world apart from COVID-19, we need to align ourselves with the current era, the digital era. The digital era has digitized all businesses. If your business is not focused on the digital revolution, your profits are already plummeting right down. So businesses can put themselves on e-commerce, have websites, have stores, bootstrap themselves on digital marketing, focus on how to garner those projects and transactions online, have the ability to use digital marketing to reach out to more clientele, work on quality of services, improve quality of life, reach out to more people. This is what businesses can do. So in answer to the first question, that's a bit of what we could be looking at. I think the second question was about brain drain in human capital or something about that. I mean, am I right? Is that a second question about brain drain in human capital across Africa? So it's a little funny to me to answer this question, but first of all, Africa, we cannot develop Africa when we like the petty and the spoiling. We need to be honest with ourselves. I think Professor Lumumba has talked about that when he said that we need to transform our minds. We need to go to some type of transformation. We need to revise our mental, our mental aptitude. So I think that there is this berserk nature. There is this uncontrolled way that Africans feel entitled to development sometimes that shocks the nerves out of me. If we are talking about human capital, the human capital needs to exist first. And human capital in Africa, it's beneath what we need to emerge as a nation. If you want to look at that, I am in cybersecurity. We are conducting cybersecurity projects across Africa. And I went through Africa. I went across last 2 years. 2 years ago, I went through South to East Africa, and I noticed that we have what you call substandard readiness when it comes to human knowledge capital. That's why in cybersecurity or in IT, you have people from India coming to take African jobs, because when it comes to looking at the strategic, organized way human capital is supposed to be acquired, we are still lacking behind time, because the purveyors of human capital resources in terms of knowledge in Africa are still using teachers methods. As I said in the presentation, most African governments are still focused on outdated degree-based ways of hiring, thereby promoting less skill and more certifications without skill. So if we are going to change the continent, we need to ensure that human capital is existential. It's not something that we dream about. This is not supposed to be a phantom. Africans are supposed to be more skilled. To be more skilled is the same formula that is used across the entire world. We need educational systems that will promulgate the existence of human capital first. Then we talk about the utility of that capital across the continent, because if human capital is existential in terms of knowledge in this economy, then we will be able to align ourselves to development. So first, Africa, we need to stop acquiring substandard education that has zero skill. We need to stop going to school for 21 years and acquiring nothing. We are not even digitally literate. You can't even properly manipulate your computer. You can't even properly speak English. And we're talking about change across the world. We can acquire change through self-pity. If we want to change as Africa, human capital must exist in terms of human knowledge capital, must be existential, must be competitive before we will be able to challenge the rest of the world. And the next question was about normalizing. Okay, let's look at it. It says that something about leaders, lack of checks and balances. How would the unification take place? We still have this issue about leadership in Africa. Like you say your elder brother is not doing you well, so that's the reason why you're going to be a poor man. I mean, who says that? Let's consider our Africa leaders like our elder brothers. If they say that you're not going to succeed, what are you going to do about that? What are you going to do about that? It's like Africa is like a family. The leaders are like your elder brothers. If they tell you you grow in a family, your elder brother tells you you're not going to succeed, what are you going to do about that? I mean, you keep telling me that your elder brother is telling me that I feel because my elder brother. I've seen people whose legs were chopped off, burgeoned, and they succeeded. So maybe Africa needs to have a tenacity that challenges bad leadership, because if we keep saying that we keep using bad leadership to ensure our failure or our development, then we're not going to go nowhere. So there is what you call meritocracy. Meritocracy is superior intellect. Africa wants to emerge, but we don't want meritocracy. Those who are saying they are saints and they are not responsible for African underdevelopment, those who are pointing fingers at those who are responsible, they themselves should acquire meritocracy, superior intellect. Then from superior intellect, we will be able, through intellect that is more superior, combat corruption. You can combat corruption without superior intellect. African indigents themselves, the citizens of this continent, we need to acquire utile education, useful knowledge. We need to be skilled. And so to conclude on that question, I have this analogy. Imagine that the president of a nation is very corrupt, given any nation, and the daughter of the president falls ill, and your junior brother or sister is the best, most powerful medical practitioner that the world could get. And you know where she is, you know where he is? In a village somewhere, sitting in a village somewhere, just, looking at the insects that are going past them. And what will happen to the president? That's the only person who could cure the daughter. He's going over there and get them. And if they called him or her and the doctor said, well, you know what, I'm not coming, they're going to have to obey, because one day you're going to have to bow down to knowledge that is superior than you. So Africa would overcome corruption through knowledge. We cannot have no knowledge, but yet we want to overcome corruption. We cannot have no skill, no leverage, but we want to overcome corruption. We need to find more leveraging when it comes to overcoming corruption at the leadership level. And what I am talking about today is meritocracy, superior intellect. Be the best there is in the world, and then nobody can stop you. So The next one is about normalizing, what is that? Normalizing, can you remind me? Normalizing unity? What is that? I can get that. Something about unity.
Well,
How is it that we can unify Africa? There's a lot of discrepancy in terms of development in Africa, I think so. So how is it that we can bring unification, or how is it that we can unify that? Was that the question?
it says that there is a lot of disparity in African countries. What do you think can normalize the growth of all countries and create more jobs for youths?
Thank you so much. What can normalize the growth? What can normalize the growth? It's what you call, what can normalize the growth is supranational development. Supranational development means that, I'm sorry to say this, but if you want to join with me, then what do you bring to the table? Every country must grow independently in Africa for us to have unity first. The contiguous mean growth of Africa, which is the growth of all the countries put together, is only as strong as the weakest link. So if each country, if we're talking about unity in Africa, we should encourage in our own independent nations, we should work for the independent growth of each country first, because unity in Africa is not going to bring development. For example, if two fools unite, there's going to be no, if two fools unite, unity is not an independent, unity does not exist in itself. If two fools unite, there's going to be war. So first of all, if we want to talk about, because I hear a lot about unification of Africa, I hear a lot about Pan-Africanism, but you are talking about Pan-Africanism among African countries that are noted for belligerent policies, belligerent unification, belligerent policies. So if we want to unify as African, we need to unify as nations within the continent first. It's a kind of love your neighbor as yourself thing. Like you can love your neighbor if you don't love yourself very much. I mean, most Africans or African countries do not have what it takes to unify with other countries, because within their countries, they are not unified. They are not unified. There are no equity processes, both in the current and future economic emergence. So I feel like unification begins when we see strong, undeterred, unbridgeable economic development in every African country. And to the best of my knowledge, that will start with education, proper education, utile education, occupational learning. When Africans learn to acquire development by merit, not through self-pity, not through the fact that the white man came here and took something. I've heard a lot of Africans try to blame somebody else for underdevelopment. When we stop complaining as a continent and take up development in our own hands as mature men, as a mature continent, then we are going to move from margins to mainstream. Thank you so much.
Doctor, that is a really interesting points that you just raised, and I'm pretty sure that the participants really want to ask you more questions on that. But before we go there, Doc, I've been laughing the entire time and listening very keenly to your submissions, and you spoke very keenly on human capital and challenging that leadership and making sure that we as Africa, basically, we now move to meritocracy other than what we know as the norm. And then you also spoke closely to, or not closely, but eloquently on education mobility. And you said, unity does not exist on itself. But I'd like to ask you this question, Doc. I'd like to ask you this question. You spoke about meritocracy. And we know that we have skilled personnel, we have experts in our different, sectors, from health all the way to education, all the way to, to add all the way to basically all the sectors. We have experienced and experts, people who actually have learned that, but there's something that is missing. What will it take for Africa to trust on the expertise that she has. You mentioned a very critical case study of a doctor who went, and studied and is qualified in the area, but is now in the village, seeing through the studying different, whatever insects, instead of going into the hospital to actually do that. And I would like to, why I'm asking this question is because previously we had from Professor Lumumba, and Professor Lumumba said, we need to make sure that the environment is the one that actually, he used a very particular word. He said we need to make sure that Africa's environment is conducive for both the brains that we have in the continent to thrive, the skills that we have in the continent to thrive. And I'm asking you and I'm challenging you, what will it take for Africa to trust on the skills that she has? And I'm saying this because I know that most of our young people are not trusted, Prof. They're not trusted in their sectors to perform. Why? Because usually we are told, no, you need 5-year experience, you need this, you need that. And we know that this is a position that most of our member states take. They usually go for the skills, they impart skills from elsewhere to come and do what our locals are able to do. If they do give the locals to do that, that task, be it in the health sector, they are underpaid. What will it take for Africa to trust her own skills and expertise, Doc? And then before you go and answer ask that question, I'm really interested. I'm excited. I hope that my participants are just as excited as we are. I would like when you're briefly, answering to that question, to also answer this one for me. I know that EAC is one of the fastest growing region in Africa, and the growth of EAC from the study has, it can be directly attributed to, manufacturing sector that is characterized by agro-processing and industrial production. And then also on buoyant service sector, especially the construction, the tourism and banking sector. And the third one is on the export sector that consists of commodities, especially tea, coffee, and gold. So, Doc, can EAC remain a fast-growing region with the same pillars or with the same pace at which it has been going, looking at, or do we have to look for completely new drivers, or better yet, let me rephrase, what it is that the community will have to do to make sure that it remains the fastest growing economic community in Africa?
Thank you. So let me answer this question, okay? The first question about, thank you for the questions, thank you so much. Let me answer the question about how Africa could learn to trust its expertise. I'm going to repeat that. I hope you would like it. I've been educated for years, and I've been in this continent. I've traveled back, come back and been in this continent for years. And I've traveled to West Africa, East Africa, Central Africa, South Africa. So as a matter of fact, we do not have expertise enough. We might have expertise, it's not enough. That's why meritocracy is a level of knowledge that challenges corruption, that challenges distrust. We do not have expertise enough in Africa. I'll give you a typical example. In my country, Cameroon, in my city, the Northwest region of Cameroon, there was a situation in 2014. The hospital, the biomedical equipment in the hospital failed. Biomedical equipment in the hospital failed. Biomedical equipment in the hospital failed. And normally you have to fly somebody from abroad who would land at the tarmac at the airport, and then will come fly over to the region in a chopper and go down and go repair biomedical equipment that were bought by the Western, were bought at companies by the Western world, in the Western world. So what would you say there? In my country, because Cameroon is not, might have problems, but it's an old economy in Africa. So why was there no biomedical image equipment technician in Cameroon, or in the northwest region of Cameroon, to service a government hospital that probably has an influx of over maybe 1,000 people a day? Why? Because these are existential realities in Africa as opposed to hearsay. Africans, so you have lab technicians. Could they service equipment, live supporting equipment? They couldn't do that. And so, for example, in our institution, we are bringing this across different African countries and different economies, where there is the focus on real skill, those skills that are imported from outside. And so they need about clinical engineers. Was there a school in the Northwest region? Can you name a school in Africa, in every African country, that is producing clinical engineers for existential life supporting hospital equipment? I'm not talking about test tubes. So there we go. You answered the question to me about expertise in reality, because Africa, in the most life-threatening, essential aspect that would make Africa respected by the rest of the world, we are not producing expertise there. So to compare income margins, we need to get to that level first. Meritocracy is what Africa needs. I'm sorry to tell you, if you want to be successful in Africa and not be stopped by anyone, knowledge will show you the way. In the middle of corruption, in the middle of whatever. And the story I gave was the fact that if a president's daughter is about to die in Africa and your brother is the best doctor and he doesn't want to come through whatever road network, the president is going to send a chopper there. If he's the only best doctor in the world, he's going to send a chopper to pick him up and take him wherever. If he says he wants to eat pineapples and have tequila before he gets to work, the president will provide that tequila, because all of that corruption is going to go down to the floor because the daughter's life is at risk. Meritocracy is going to win always in Africa. So the second question.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you so much. But you know what? Like I said, this is a really interesting discussion. But due to time constraints, please, can you just make sure that you tackle your next question in less than a minute, and then we will go on to the final lap of our program.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm sorry for taking so much time for the first question there that you asked. The second question was about EHC. Being a fast-growing region across Africa, and you asked the question, what new drivers can we install, or what can we do to maintain that growth? The answer to that question is not a very beautiful answer, but I tell you, it's education. We need to change the fundamental aspect, which is education, because education is the bedrock for everything. You know, we could talk about the fact that this industry exists here, tourism, and we could focus on commodity exports. We could focus on global trade or external financing, as we love so much in Africa. We love taking money from others in Africa. It's a beautiful thing. Africans love money. So, or we could bootstrap ourselves with real post-industry, which is the focus on information and knowledge, focus on information and services. Africans can focus on industries that are directly related to the knowledge economy, as I talked about, e-commerce, and we could put everything on the digital era. Even I know the professor mentioned something about agriculture, but agriculture has been digitized. So we cannot practice agrarian agriculture in Africa. If the EAC wants to move ahead and maintain a strong economic growth, we should focus on the current era, knowledge capital, and have businesses turn towards that for growth. I think that is something we could get perspective from. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, thank you so much. I don't know if we still have Professor Lumumba on the platform. Prof, are you still here? Do we still have?
For now, he's busy. We can go on with a few more questions for Dr. Achu. Then Professor will be joining us soon.
Okay. So, Dr. Achu, you know, we would like to actually continue this conversation with you before we close. You raised some
Okay.
really, really interesting points there. And Reneve, can you please take 2 more questions from our panelists? From our participants that can go to Prof. To Doctor before we go on to the last session.
Okay.
So participants, remember we're talking about the impact of COVID-19 on the economy of the East African community. And then we are looking at the fact that knowledge is power. We've so far heard from Professor Lumumba, who spoke really, really eloquently on the issues of continental integration. He also mentioned the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which earlier on I had told you that that is one huge opportunity for you to look into as a young person. I understand that this year, our member states are now on the negotiation, round 3 of negotiations, that is that negotiating trade in services. What does it mean for you? And now that also we are talking to Dr. Coach, and he is touching on the aspect of education mobility as well as a knowledge-based economy. Are we going to see Africa trusting on the skill sets and the services that she has in the continent as opposed to looking outside else? I'm still not very satisfied by that, by the answer that Dr. Coach gave. But however, I would like to give this opportunity to 2 more young participants who have asked our questions to Dr. Coach. Reneve, please go ahead.
Thank you, Doctor. Someone called Richard Chimbari is saying there is the concept of talents in human capital. Let me see. This doesn't seem like a question. We have a question up here.
Okay.
Let me see. Someone saying, Dr. Gustav, how are African youths going to deal with post-COVID-19 in the workplace when labor laws in most African countries are not enforced or monitored? That is one of the questions. And someone said, based on what Prof. Lumumba said, I think Africa has to invest in research and innovation department. So my question is, what we as Africans have to do in order to minimize importations and start to invest in manufacturing by starting with raw materials we have? Thank you. So those are the 2 questions we have now. Another question from Emmanuel Basse. He's saying, hello, doctor. What can you say about fintech, which is an emerging channel in a digital globe in addressing the difficult access to loans within Africa by MSMEs? Those are the 3 questions we have so far.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if you are familiar with fintech, but if you are, you can say something about it. And if not, maybe like it can be for future interactions, because we'll be having more.
Okay.
Wibena is so committed to having such interactions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, the first question was labor laws, labor law question. And so how do we cope with that? Labor laws when governments in Africa, how do we cope with post-COVID-19 when government does not impose labor laws properly? So before COVID-19, you said that the government already, that's a rhetorical question. You said that the government doesn't impose labor laws. So after COVID-19, if the government is not imposing labor laws after COVID-19, they are not going to impose labor laws. So I feel like that question is a question and an answer in itself. But again, it goes back to this issue about Africans always using government to blame themselves for whatever. Your government is like your elder brother. If they're not going to impose stuff, you're going to have to educate yourself about those laws and those structures, and you're going to have to go past that. I mean, imposition of labor laws is a position of labor laws is reliant on the fact that you're heavily dependent on employability. You're an employability that is sourced by another person. So if Africans work on keeping themselves employed, you're not going to care about who is imposing what labor laws or something somewhere when it comes to you being an employee. So if you're an employer, labor laws favor you more because the employers pay huge tax to government, and so government has to work thanks to their tune, or else they're not going to get money. They're not going to get taxes to develop the country. Number 2, to minimize the impact of importation of products across Africa, we need to produce production, distribution, consumption, management. We need to do that, and we need to do that in an era that is relevant. We are living in the information era, in the knowledge economy. We need to do that in an era that is relevant. To get that done, as I said, we need to that's a simple. That's not as simple as it sounds. When an African country says they're producing this or that, phones or laptops or computer, what do they actually mean? So I hear African countries come up with things like, they are making this thing, we are making this right now, we're producing laptops now, we're doing this. I'm like, are kindergarten children or post-kindergarten children learning electrical and electronic engineering? Because if they're not studying electrical and electronic engineering, then you're not producing laptops. Where are you producing laptops from? Like, you just had boogeyman, you just had aliens who just appeared from nowhere, no educational background. Africa cannot produce, for example, what educational background is African countries housing right now that will cost them to produce cars in the future? Or you're going to just get to, what educational systems are Africans promulgating right now that will make us produce phones in the future? That's the question you should ask right there. It's a prophological issue. It's about asking the first question: where do phones come from? It requires an educational background. So if we want to produce and minimize importation in Africa, we should revise, we should have a structured acquisition of knowledge to be able to get that done. And that starts from way back. You can't just get people like robots to start producing, making cars. We need to have a system that accounts for that. And the last thing you asked about fintech, I'm not very familiar with that. So I think I'll leave that for your forum and that to answer, and your forum too. I think I'll leave that for Wibena to look into it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Coach. That has been really, really informative.
So, yeah, and I think you asked the question. I think you asked the question about. Okay.
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
You said you were not happy with an answer I gave. I think you said you were not happy with an answer. Make sure you give me 0.5 minutes, 0.5 minutes to look into what you said you weren't happy about. 0.5 minutes.
No. What I wanted to imply was that, you know, the answers that you did give, they only created more other questions to them. And absolutely, not partially, but I agree with you when you say that we need to now look at the roots of where Africa's problems sprout from. And that is from our educational system. And as we know that most of our systems have actually, almost all of our educational systems have never been reviewed in a very long time. And I'm talking 50 years, I'm talking 60 years. And absolutely the issue of irrelevance there is there. But however, Doc, however, I believe that the continent is full with experts that we just need to trust and put them and start trusting them with delivery of whatever it is that we want. I see often at times our countries, I'll just give you an example about fintech and on e-commerce particularly. We're now talking about e-commerce and, you know, we're discussing, you know, payment gateways. And we know that we have young people in the continent who are very versatile with technology, and they have solutions for, you know, that we can use as payment gateways. But however, we would rather trust someone else who comes from someone else, you know, in the neighboring or whatever in the West, to come and give us the same solution that we know that young person can provide. That is where I was talking about. And Doc, I know it's a very debatable discussion. I do not mean to open the dialogue. However, let us do this. I would like at this point in time to ask Mr. Wycliffe Aganda, that is the Executive Director at Wibena Institute. He is experienced entrepreneur. He's an experienced entrepreneur. And as I had mentioned to you earlier, ladies and gentlemen, he is the ESL expert with a demonstrated, history of working in the education management industry. And I'm pretty sure that in his closing remarks, he will get to touch on some of the issues that we mentioned here. Otherwise, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me at this point in time to welcome Mr. Aganda, the CEO of Wibena Institute. Mr. Wibena, we welcome you. I mean, Aganda, we welcome you.
Thank you very much, fellow comrades, Dr. Achu, PLO, and the rest who have managed to join this auspicious conference. We managed to, we had a problem before I begin with my remarks. I do want to apologize for the technical hitch that we had. This really made us delayed with the conference, but we promise that our next conference will be really on time, and we shall check on that. So I do pass my sincere apologies on that. So regarding the economic impact of COVID-19 in East Africa, before I just want to comment on these globally with an extension to our main topic. What I wanted to really talk about is that the economic impact of COVID-19 has really affected us in three ways. One, it has affected us on direct impact on production. Number two, it also affected us, especially on the supply chain and market distribution. And number three, we also realized that the financial impact on farms and financial markets were greatly affected. So our main objective of this conference was to really answer the following questions that we were interested on, so as to be able to deliberate on the recommendation and take it to the relevant policy makers. So one of the first questions that we were interested on is that what's the data across East Africa or globally? Then number two, what was the projected impact? And then number three, we also anticipated to know that what was the expected timeline and for how long it how to handle it. And I believe that most of the speakers tackled on this, and we are now working on the recommendation as well as the report of this, and then to see the way forward and forge ahead with the future planning after the COVID-19. Otherwise, guys, thank you very much for today. I don't have much. It was a wonderful conference, and Shamil, I salute you, and thank you for the wonderful work that you've done. And to the participants who joined also the platform a bit late, we are greatly honored to be with you guys, and thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you so much, Mr. Aganda. Ladies and gentlemen, please do follow Wibena Institute on your social media platform, and make sure that you're also keeping in touch with them to know more about the programs that they have. And just as a recap, when I'm leaving, remember that we talked about the economic impact of COVID-19 in the East Africa community. We had from Professor Lumumba and as well as Dr. Coach, who actually shared with us so much information regarding what it is that we need to take, the steps that we need to take as African youths, as Africans, in order for us to make sure that we realize the Africa that we want. And remember, we touched on, the issues of making sure that we as Africans, are invested in our education, number one. That has been a very huge topic. We also spoke to the issue of, reigniting our industries from, the aviation, agriculture, manufacturing, hospitality, and the financial sector. And that you as young people have a very huge role to play in making sure that you create, innovative solutions that can, be applicable today. And then we also spoke about, reduce forest earnings that our countries are going through, reduce household spending, decline in government spending, and how we as young people or as Africans, we can actually come together and make sure that we mitigate the effects of COVID-19 in the East Africa community. It is up to you. Remember, the responsibility is on you, and it's not really on government. Like one great philosopher usually said, is that he usually said that, it is not about what your government can do for you, but the big question is, what can you do for your government? As young people, I'm compelling you to make sure that you go out there and do something, add value to the different industries. And above all, make sure that you are safe, be safe, and make sure that you keep the next person safe. Remember, COVID-19 is here to stay. So Prof challenged that there is nothing like post-COVID, because it's here to stay. So let us look at what we are going to do. Once again, remember to follow Wibena on our social platforms. Also keep in touch with the organizing committee or Wibena Institute for more programs that they have. So from me, ladies and gentlemen, Shamil Akhosi, and from the organizing committee at Wibena, and as well as all the notable speakers that we had today, Professor Lumumba, Dr. Coach, as well as the CEO of Wibena. Ladies and gentlemen, from me to you, it is a bye. Thank you. It has been a great pleasure.
Thank you a lot, Shamil Agosi. Thank you everyone who's joined us. It's been an honor and a privilege as Wibena Impact. Follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram. We are there as Wibena Impact. Let's stay in touch. Let's interact. Let's see how we can move Africa forward. Let's see how we can see ourselves through this pandemic standing all together. Thank you so much. I, as Rene Eve Wayo, the convener, I thank you a lot and looking forward to interacting with you great people again.
Thank you, Rene.